This is The World This Weekend. Good evening, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Tonight, police work to identify the 8 bodies pulled from the St. Lawrence River and search for another missing person.
We still have one boy out there that nobody's seen him.
Also tonight, calls to revamp the RCMP. Mounties and politicians weigh in on the findings of the Nova Scotia Mass Casualty Commission.
We have to take concrete action to see the kind of reforms to prevent this kind of tragedy from occurring again.
And another violent attack on a Canadian transit system.
Safety does not grow on a system that is under-resourced.
That's later, but first. Search crews have been back out again on the St. Lawrence River near the community of Aguasasne. They're looking for a local man whose disappearance on Wednesday led to the discovery of 8 bodies in the river. Katie Nicholson is there and brings us this report.
A helicopter circles low over a marshy outcrop. Not far away, Matt Mitchell sits back in his pickup.
A lot of noise. All you hear is fan boats and just seeing cops everywhere.
For 4 days now, the steady drone of choppers and airboats, a reminder of tragedy in the river.
It's like a big dark cloud over the res right now, so it's hopefully everybody gets through this shit though.
Roughly 40 searchers have braved frigid conditions, pulling ashore 8 bodies and searching for one more. A local man, Casey Oakes.
Well, we still have one boy out there that nobody's seen him, or I really don't know him.
At the recreation center, Alice Thompson lugs in a massive vat of homemade soup for the search crews. Anything to help cope with the waves of grief washing in from the river.
Oh, sad, especially the babies and little children. Yeah. Well, everybody's emotional probably right now.
Details about the 8 people who've been recovered from the river are slowly surfacing. CBC News has learned that Florin Iordake had been refused asylum and was set to be deported. He and his young family had been living in Canada for a year and a half. A close relative who hadn't seen him in about 6 years was looking forward to reuniting with him and planned to pick them up in New York. Now, the family is working on repatriating their bodies back to Romania. 4 Indian nationals also perished. The deaths of the Chaudhry family making headlines in their home state, Gujarat, in western India. But Casey Oakes, whose clothes were found near the bodies and who was last seen stepping onto a boat much like the one recovered from the scene, still missing. Police say teams will renew the search again tomorrow. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Akwesasne.
Politicians and policing experts say Canada's national police force must change. This follows a scathing report this week from the Mass Casualty Commission investigating Canada's deadliest mass shooting. A gunman posing as a Mountie went on a rampage over 2 days, killing 22 people in rural Nova Scotia. The report outlines the failures in the RCMP's response to the massacre and calls for dramatic reforms. As Marina von Stackelberg reports, the Mounties have a spotty record when it comes to following through on similar recommendations in the past.
Incidents like this will happen, and we must learn again from these incidents and move forward.
Well, incidents like this, they don't happen, right? This was the worst mass shooting in history.
CBC's chief political correspondent Rosemary Barton in an interview this Sunday with the interim head of the RCMP. Commissioner Mike Duhem had the report into the mass shooting for more than a day before it was released to the public, but he did not read the recommendations. More than half of them focus on how the police force he is in charge of needs to change. That includes the call for an independent review of the RCMP.
I know our folks, our employees have done the best that they could to the best of their abilities with the equipment and training they have. But that being said, with the challenge they face, we did not meet up to the expectation.
The scathing report says the RCMP withheld information during the 13-hour rampage, leaving community members at risk. The most stark example, instead of sending an alert, they posted on Twitter. Sean McLeod and his partner Alana Jenkins were murdered in their home. Scott is Sean's brother.
There's a much higher probability that he would have been alive especially with the alert, if there had been an alert the night before.
The commission says the RCMP needs to improve communication with the public and internally. It wants training for new Mounties increased from 6 months to 3 years, and says the RCMP's job providing local policing in rural communities across Canada must be reviewed.
We've seen other circumstances where similar recommendations have come out, and if they were followed, perhaps this mass shooting wouldn't have occurred as it did.
Christopher Schneider is an expert in policing at Brandon University.
What if the RCMP ignore all of the recommendations? What are the consequences for that? Is there any teeth to the recommendations if they are not followed? And it's not clear that there is. This might be another example of the RCMP kicking the can down the road.
Canada's Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino is pledging more oversight.
It is the government's expectation that they make those reforms urgently so that we can restore the trust and confidence of the community so that this kind of tragedy never occurs again.
The inquiry wants Ottawa and Nova Scotia to create and fund an oversight body within the next 2 months to provide regular updates on whether the Mounties are following through on the recommendations. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet met today after a night of massive protests against judicial reform. One of the things on their agenda was the creation of a controversial new National Guard, overseen by far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. Our colleague, World at 6 host Susan Bonner, is in Jerusalem covering this story, and she joined us earlier. Susan, how is the creation of this new National Guard being received?
Well, many people here see it as a quid pro quo for pausing the reform of the judiciary, that Netanyahu had to give something to his coalition partners because he needs support in order to stay in power. And his critics say it is just wrong to put someone as extreme as Ben-Gvir in an oversight role of what they call a paramilitary unit. Today, the Attorney General and the National Chief of Police came out and said a National Guard was not needed. The controversial force, Stephanie, is expected to include 2,000 service members. The cost is approximately $278 million US, and all other government departments are going to have to cut their budgets to fund this.
Last night, when you filed your report from Tel Aviv, you mentioned how divided Israeli society is. What are the fault lines?
Well, we've all seen the Netanyahu's detractors. We've seen them pour into the streets in protest. But Netanyahu still has supporters in this country. Yes, his popularity has taken a hit since this crisis, but he still has a strong base. And many in that base believe the court is too powerful, that it needs reform. They don't like, for example, when the Supreme Court has in the past struck down laws that would expand settlements. That's just one example. There is, Stephanie, a kind of culture war here, a fight over what kind of state Israel should be: liberal, secular, or more conservative and religious. The polarization in Israel is intensifying. And just today, for example, the head of internal security warned that divisions in this society could lead to a disaster for the nation.
And then, Susan, you've also been in Ramallah talking to young Palestinians. How are they reacting to what's been happening in Israel? Are they even talking about what's happening in Israel?
Well, they certainly know about it. We asked them about it. They're not so impressed with the fight for Israel's democracy. They just simply don't see that it has much impact on their lives. It's not about them. They have more pressing concerns about their lives under occupation. Israeli protesters, many of them, will say that if these court reforms go through, it will make Palestinian lives more difficult. But that's not necessarily how the Palestinians see it. We're going to have a lot more on all of this in the days ahead on our coverage.
All right, we look forward to that. Thank you so much for this, Susan.
Thanks, Stephanie.
CBC's Susan Bonner in Jerusalem, and the World at 6 will have full coverage of events from Israel and the occupied West Bank as they unfold over the next few days. In Finland, Sanna Marin has conceded defeat in the country's parliamentary election. Her centre-left Social Democratic Party has won the third most seats in the closely fought race. The Conservative National Coalition Party has won the most seats, though it'll have to make a deal with other parties to form government. Marine burst on the political scene in 2019, becoming the world's youngest leader at just 34 years old. She led the country through the COVID-19 pandemic, and after Russia invaded Ukraine, she launched a successful bid for Finland to join NATO, which will officially happen in the coming days. But despite her popularity at home and abroad, polls showed many Finns have concerns about inflation and Finland's rising national debt. Well, it's political theater meets courtroom drama in a case we still know little about. Donald Trump is expected to make a court appearance Tuesday. He is reportedly set to be arraigned on multiple charges in connection to so-called hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. But what those charges are and exactly how many remains sealed. Katie Simpson sets the stage from New York.
NYPD officers unload a truck carrying dozens of metal barricades on the street surrounding the Lower Manhattan courthouse. They're restricting sidewalks, preparing to close down roads, and increasing their visibility, all ahead of Tuesday's historic moment.
Hopefully this will be as painless and classy as possible.
Joe Tacopina is Donald Trump's lawyer. He says the details of the former president's surrender and arraignment are still being finalized. The only thing he says is certain is that Trump will vigorously fight this case.
We will take the indictment, we will dissect it, the team will look at every potential issue that we will be able to challenge, and we will challenge. And of course, I very much anticipate a motion to dismiss.
Multiple U.S. news outlets say they're expecting Trump to face upwards of 30 charges in connection to the documentation of hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels to keep their alleged affair secret. The actual charges will be kept under seal until Trump appears before a judge. It is something he is reportedly dreading, though he is capitalizing on his legal woes to boost his re-election campaign. The Trump team says it has seen a surge in donations, collecting more than $4 million in the 24 hours after the indictment was announced.
I think the American people see that. It's the very essence of the abuse of the prosecutive function, which is pursuing a person rather than pursuing a real crime.
Former Attorney General Bill Barr is one of the many Republicans lining up to defend the former president.
There's nothing inherently wrong.
The conservative movement is largely united in backing Trump. Even people like Barr, who have criticized him in the past, support him.
It's just a banana republic that we're living in now.
Some Trump voters, including New Yorker Brian Chinesky, say they no longer trust the justice system. Chinesky took a walk around the Lower Manhattan courthouse where Tuesday's proceedings will take place to see the setup ahead of the spectacle. On top of the increased security, news trucks and tents take up much of the sidewalk space. The site is drawing in curious tourists, including Josh Phillips.
I think for a lot of people feel like this has been a long time coming, like there's been a lot of scandal surrounding, former President Trump, so not really surprised, to be honest.
Police are bracing for this area to be flooded with protesters, but so far, all of the demonstrations have been small and peaceful, and authorities hope it stays that way. Katie Simpson, CBC News, New York.
In Russia, one person is dead and at least 25 others are injured after an explosion tore through a cafe in the city of St. Petersburg. Officials say the person killed is a well-known pro-Kremlin military blogger who goes by the name Vladlen Tatarsky. Russian media reports say Tatarsky was meeting members of the public at the cafe when a person presented him with a statuette which then exploded. There have been no claims of responsibility so far, and Kyiv denies any involvement. A stabbing in Surrey, British Columbia is the latest attack raising questions about safety on Canada's transit systems. As Philip Lee Shannock reports, violent incidents on transit systems jumped almost 50% last year in some Canadian cities.
Another week, another violent incident on public transit. Yesterday morning, a man was attacked on a TransLink bus in Surrey. Here's Surrey RCMP Corporal Vanessa Munn.
A person had been stabbed on a bus. He has since been transported to hospital with life-threatening injuries.
The victim was slashed in the throat. A man is under arrest for attempted murder. Police do not believe the suspect and victim knew each other and don't have a motive for the attack.
The investigation is still in the very early stages, and we are working to determine all the details of what led up to this.
1 week ago, Gabrielle Miguelas was fatally stabbed inside a Toronto subway station. Police say the 16-year-old had been sitting on a bench when he was attacked.
I see the violence escalating, but you never think it's going to happen to you.
The victim's mother, Andrea Miguelas, says more needs to be done to help people in crisis. More social services for people with addictions and mental health issues. Police have charged a 22-year-old man with first-degree murder in that incident. He was unhoused and wanted for violating probation.
Could this have been prevented somehow from the beginning? How was this person, were they going to school? Did they have supports? Did they have a home?
And the problem is not just in Toronto, where John Danino, president of the Amalgamated Transit Union Canada, says violent incidents on transit jumped by almost 50% last year.
The kind of numbers that we're seeing in Toronto is pretty consistent right across the country. Edmonton reported about a 53% increase. Just last week, there was a number of assaults and stabbings, unprovoked attacks in Calgary Transit, but we're seeing it in every municipality and jurisdiction across this country.
Aaron Kuhn is Calgary's Emergency Management and Community Safety Chief. He says the city has begun to deploy more officers and security guards on the transit system, part of a $5.9 million investment.
So we'll see an additional 25% growth in our peace officer allocation, and our partners in corporate security with security guards on the platform should be all operational by the end of May as well, with 31 security guards assisting us on the transit system.
Vincent Puhaka is with the Toronto advocacy group TTC Riders. He says extra funding for overtime to add about 80 police officers to patrol the system ended 3 weeks ago.
We actually don't have any data yet as to whether the extra police patrols actually did reduce violence.
This week, Toronto's transit system decided to use $15 million in emergency funds to pay for safety measures that include extending the contracts for 50 private security guards. Philip Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
It's Election Day Eve on Prince Edward Island. 27 ridings are up for grabs in tomorrow's vote. There are several key ballot box issues from housing to climate change. But according to political analyst Don Desaru, after the pandemic and 2 hurricanes, PEI voters want a government that can respond well in a crisis.
I think our focus now is not just on the big issues, but on government competence, government readiness, government's ability to get their act together and deal with something when it does happen. That has become a sort of a sleeper issue throughout the campaign.
CBC News will have special coverage of the PEI election on Monday. It begins at 6 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Atlantic on CBC News Network. You can also stream it live on CBC Gem or CBC Listen. As a generation of Canadians nears retirement, demand for skilled tradespeople is soaring. And while provincial governments are investing in ways to get more people into the trades, there are still many barriers to entry. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson reports.
Megan Donnelly was in her 30s, a university graduate with a career in insurance, when she decided it was time for a change.
I needed a job that was physically stimulating as well as mentally stimulating.
She's now a third-year steam pipe and welding apprentice, and things are going even better than she imagined.
I'm not even at my full pay rate, and I'm already making the same as what I was making after 10 years at the insurance company.
But for people hoping to break into the trades, the experience isn't always so smooth. Many young people are encountering barriers landing a formal apprenticeship, while politicians like Ontario's Premier Doug Ford are promising a lucrative career that you can enter straight out of high school.
1 in 5 job openings in Ontario will be in the skilled trades.
Mike Gordon is Director of Canadian Training for the United Association of Union Plumbers, Fitters, Welders and Service Techs. He says aspiring tradespeople have to be aware of what exactly is being promised by colleges and training programs.
I strongly suggest do the research. Find out the outcomes.
To become a licensed journey person, what you need is an apprenticeship contract. Under this model, companies take on new recruits to train with an accredited tradesperson. Their hours are logged and their progress monitored. But what many programs actually offer is a job placement. The students may get some work experience, but they won't get any closer to getting accreditation.
You spend this large amount of money, there's an expectation that you're going to begin a career but oftentimes there's temporary placements for employment, and there is no contract of apprenticeship signed.
There are other barriers too. Edmonton-based Rebecca Cragnis was once one of a few women, let alone Indigenous women, on a construction site. As she rose through the ranks, she made it her personal mission to make the industry more welcoming for everyone.
Representation and role models are probably the biggest avenue for change for the apprenticeship system.
Now she's an Indigenous Business Relations and Community Engagement Director for general contracting giant Bird Construction, and she sits on a number of groups advocating for women in the trades.
The traditional hours of work of an apprenticeship are usually early mornings, sometimes late evenings, and that can be tricky to navigate if you have a young child to take to childcare. So I feel like there are some opportunities for industry to maybe be more accommodating.
The experts we talked to also all agree, despite recent promises in Ontario that you can go into trades training straight out of grade 11, they suggest students finish high school, especially focusing on math and science, as measuring, calculations and programming machines will be key to working in the trades now and in the future. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
In Indian-administered Kashmir, rap music has become an outlet for young people in a highly volatile region. It's a subculture that started out with fiery anthems of dissent, but because of recent limitations placed on free speech by the government, it's become watered down. Freelance correspondent Murali Krishnan sent us this report from Srinagar, the region's summer capital.
Said Museb has been rapping for over 15 years. Better known by his stage name, MC Museb, he raps in Kashmiri, Urdu, Punjabi, and English. He says he wants to share his cultural perspective beyond the borders of Kashmir.
First of all, I want to represent my Kashmir. I want to take it to the higher level. The people of India don't love Kashmir rappers that much. They don't support rappers that much. They thought they are stone pelters.
In 2019, the Indian government stripped Kashmir of its special status, splitting it into two federally administered territories. That led to a security clampdown and a media blackout. Even though he lives in a politically volatile region, MC Museb doesn't take on the government in his lyrics.
I rap on social evils and I rap on myself and my dreams. In Kashmir, it's a conflict area and we had to rap in such a manner that no one will harm us. We don't have to say anything about government.
A number of Kashmiri artists have made their mark through protest music. The movement picked up steam in 2010 after hip-hop star Roshan Elahi, better known as MC Cash, released his hit song I Protest in remembrance of civilians killed in an uprising in September 2010. The song became an anthem of dissent.
Can you hear the screams? Now see the revolution. Their bullets as stones, don't talk restitution.
After the success of I Protest, police raided his studio. MC Cash went on to release several politically charged hits. But in recent years, he has gone quiet.
No one wants a knock at the door.
Ibrahim Wani is an assistant professor from Kashmir University. He says the recent developments in Kashmir have robbed rap music of some of its political bite.
It was the Arab Spring and the streets in Kashmir were also alive. Political rap exploded onto this scene. There's a lot of energy still, but rap has moved away from politics intelligently. It questions patriarchy, stereotypes, hierarchies.
Angry political lyrics have been replaced by songs about social issues, such as drug addiction, poverty, and gender-based discrimination. Anam Nasir goes by the stage name Rapper Annie. She's the first female rapper to perform in public in Kashmir, and one of only a handful of women in the region who make music in the male-dominated genre.
Here, people don't like girls doing such things. They cannot see a female coming out and leveling up. They are just jealous of the woman.
Narcis says it's not easy, but she is pushing the limits of what's possible.
As a woman and as a female rapper in Kashmir, it is very difficult for me to move forward in the rap field here. a lot of hurdles here, and the conservative society and so many orthodox people that keep pushing me down. Besides that, I write about the haters and the trollers still stalking me everywhere.
This new crop of artists are keeping the socially conscious roots of Kashmiri hip hop alive, even if they have to play it safer than they used to. Murli Krishnan, CBC News, Srinagar, Kashmir.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can listen to this program anytime on the CBC Listen app or on the CBC News YouTube channel. Boldly going where no Canadian has gone before. Tomorrow morning, NASA and the Canadian Space Agency will unveil the crew for the Artemis II mission, and one of the astronauts will be Canadian. It'll be the first crewed mission to the moon in more than 50 years, and the first time a Canadian has ever gone into deep space. The CBC's Nicole Mortellaro is in Houston for tomorrow's announcement, and we spoke to her earlier. Nicole, do we know who this astronaut is?
We don't. I mean, the astronaut does, but we don't. We have 4, unlike the U.S. that have 41 active astronauts, we have 4. And it will be one of those 4, either Jeremy Hansen, Jennifer Sidey-Gibbons, Joshua Kutrick, or David Saint-Jacques. Now, David went up already to the International Space Station in 2018, so probably not him, but one of those 3, probably.
Okay, a mystery that will be unveiled tomorrow. But how did this all happen? Why does a Canadian get to fly on this mission?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because, you know, we are a smaller nation, but we are a big nation that contributes to space and space missions. And in this case, it's because of our contribution to Lunar Gateway. This will be a space station in lunar orbit. And of course, just like Canadarm2 helped build the International Space Station, Canadarm3 will be there to do the same thing, and that gets us a seat on this second mission.
Well, lucky us. A moon mission sounds extremely cool, but humans have been to the moon before. Why are we going back?
Yeah, you know, Apollo, a lot of people, I got to say, a lot of people ask that, you know, been there, done that, why are we going back? Well, Apollo, the Apollo missions was really because of a space race to see if the Americans could do it before the Soviets, which they did. But this is an international effort. 23 countries are involved, have signed the Artemis Accords. This is believed to be a new space economy, you know, will be created from this going to the moon. And the plan is to eventually go on to Mars.
So then what is the long-term plan for the Artemis mission?
Well, Artemis II, this mission that the astronauts will orbit the moon, is scheduled for November 2024. It will probably slip to 2025, in my opinion. And then it comes Artemis III, which is tentatively scheduled for 2025. And that will be when we get boots on the ground. We will have humans back on the moon. And this is really exciting. I can't wait. This will be done in our lifetimes.
Yeah, incredible. The CBC's Nicole Mortellaro in Houston. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you.
Some of the haunting score from the film Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, composed by the legendary Ryuichi Sakamoto. Sakamoto has died at the age of 71. Born in Tokyo, he also starred in Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, alongside David Bowie.
Are you an evil spirit? Yeah, and one of yours, I hope.
Sakamoto had no acting experience, but agreed to star if he could also score the film. He was an electronic music trailblazer, and in 1978 co-founded the band Yellow Magic Orchestra. They were synth-pop pioneers, incorporating computer and arcade game noises to create a whole new sound. Sakamoto was an environmental activist, speaking out against nuclear power after the disasters caused by the Fukushima nuclear plant meltdowns in 2011. He was diagnosed with throat cancer in 2014, but kept making music, helping compose the score for the film The Revenant and releasing a full-length album on his 71st birthday in January. In online tributes, the band Massive Attack has remembered Sakamoto as a genius and a gentleman. Questlove points out even if his name isn't familiar, many other popular artists cite Sakamoto as their god. We'll leave you tonight with some of Ryuichi Sakamoto's best-known work, the score for the 1987 film The Last Emperor, which earned him an Oscar and a Grammy. This has been The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Good night.